Welcome to Franklin Covey on Leadership. I'm Will Hodling, and every week we will unpack the mistakes, methods, and mindsets that built the world's most credible leaders. We hope their hard-earned insights accelerate your leadership journey. Today's guest is Dr. Sunita Sah, Professor of Management and Organizations at Cornell's Graduate School of Management. Dr. Sah is the author of Defy, The Power of No in a World That Demands Yes. In today's conversation, we will discuss her personal journey of defiance. We'll share some practical tips for how you can bring defiance into your life, and we'll discuss advice for business leaders hoping to build more innovative and creative cultures. Dr. Sunita Sah, welcome to Franklin Covey on Leadership. Great to have you.
It's wonderful to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Lovely, lovely. So your name, Sunita, in Sanskrit, means she who conducts herself in good behavior. It's an ironic name for somebody who ended up writing a book called Defy, unless you have a prequel called Compliance that I don't know about. So I would love to hear, how did your childhood, how did your upbringing lead you to be the person you are today?
Well, I really could have had a prequel called Compliance, because my childhood was known. I was known for being an obedient daughter, a good student, and I really did live up to that aspect of my name meaning good, in that I did what I was told. I went to school on time, did all my homework as expected, even had my hair cut the way my parents wanted. And this is what many of us interpret by what does good mean, especially what does a good child mean. And it often means doing what you're told to do, to obey, to being polite, to not questioning authority. So we really start equating compliance with being good, obedience with being good, and defiance with being bad. And it isn't seen as a good thing to be defiant, to say no, or to speak up when you see something going wrong. It isn't often seen that way, and we have that strong moral equation. And I was always fascinated by that if we are polite, if we obey, if we do what we're told, we're seen as being good. But that's really living up to everybody else's expectations and what they want from you, rather than something that's true and good within ourselves. And so that really inspired me to do a lot of the research that I do today. It set me down on that path. So my first career was in medicine. Why? Because of expectations. I had the grades, and I was told, not just by parents, but teachers in the community, medicine is the best thing you can do. And that's what I ended up doing. I'm now an organizational psychologist, and I've really delved into some of the advice that we receive that is often quite bad and obviously bad, but we end up going along with it. And what can we do to really stay true to ourselves and live a life in alignment with our own values?
Was there a moment in that personal journey, from being an MD to a consultant to a researcher, I know you focused a lot on forensic science, to then defiance, where you had a visceral, I need to defy, I need to stand up, I need to reject some of the expectations that have been put on me?
I think there were many moments of feeling in a situation that visceral reaction that you're talking about, this element of tension between what's expected of me and what I think is the right thing to do in this situation. And in many of those situations, I didn't have the skill set to defy. I didn't have the skill set to speak up, because I was so trained to be compliant. Nobody had ever trained me on how to be defiant and how to speak up when it matters. And so I actually felt that tension a lot in my life. So was it one particular moment? There were many moments that I felt that tension, and I was fascinated by people that could defy, and I always wondered, how can they do it, and how do they do it so naturally? And that really led me to study that in more depth.
In your book, you tell a powerful story about witnessing a small act of defiance from your mom, small but ultimately powerful, and how that has stuck with you over time. So it might not have been your own personal defiance, but it's something you witnessed that was very close to you. Would you mind sharing that story and talking about how that experience has stuck with you over time?
Yeah, absolutely. So you're right, and this was quite a pivotal moment for me. Maybe not immediately, but definitely afterwards, as I recalled it. So my mum is one of the most compliant people I know, right? She does all the grocery shopping, the cleaning, the cooking. Like, she served everybody else's needs. And I grew up with the idea about this is what goodness really means. She's quite petite, 4'10" at the most. And I remember a particular day that we were walking back from the grocery store and she was pulling along a rickety shopping cart. And we decided to take a shortcut. And that shortcut was through what we call a snicket in West Yorkshire in England. It's just a very narrow alleyway. And often we don't go through that. I certainly wasn't allowed to go through the snicket by myself at such a young age. I was about 7 or 8 at the time. And we went through the snicket because we were tired. We wanted to get home earlier. And that's when we saw them. It was a group of teenage boys that blocked our path. And one of them shouted out, "Go back home." The others laughed, and they started throwing out these kind of vulgar comments at us. Now, my reaction was instant to this. I did what I was trained to do. So I instantly grabbed my mom's arm. I averted my gaze. I didn't want any confrontation or conflict, and I just wanted to maneuver as fast as possible through the boys to actually get home. But my mom, I thought she would do the same. And she did something different that day that left me quite stunned. So she actually stopped and she pulled the shopping cart upright and she put one hand on her hip and she looked at the boys directly in the eye. So here she is, my petite mom, 4'10", wearing her blue-green sari, one tidy plait at the back of her hair. And she looked at them directly in the eyes and she said, "What do you mean?" And my heart started racing really fast at this point, and I grabbed her arm even tighter, and I whispered to her, "Come on, Ma." And she said no to me. So she shrugged me off, and she looked again at the boys who hadn't answered, and she said again, quite firmly but calmly, "What do you mean?" And the boys didn't say anything at all. So then she started going, "Well, yes, you think you're such clever boys, yeah, big, tough boys." And the boys just started looking at each other. And then one of them muttered, "Let's go." And they just dispersed. My mum grabbed the shopping cart and she started walking through the alleyway quite fast. And I just stood there frozen thinking, what just happened? And that was a really important moment for me because it taught me quite a few things. So one was that defiance can often come from the person that you least expect it to come from. And that's because it's a skill set. It's not a personality. We can be compliant one day and we can be defiant the next day. But it really is a skill that we can choose to use or not. Like, she must have encountered those boys or people like those boys before. And so she might have been quietly practicing for that particular day, or maybe that day she decided to say something because I was there. And it was really interesting that I was the one that wanted her to be compliant. Like the parental roles had reversed, right? I wanted to do what I had been trained to do, and yet she did something different. And that really had what I call the defiance domino effect, this ripple effect, in that it can stay with us and it can affect other people. So it doesn't just change you as a person, because I do think defiance, if you can live in alignment with your values, you become more yourself, which is transformative. But it's also often transformative for the people that observe it, knowing that this can happen. And that in that way, we have this ripple effect in which that situation lasted and it had an effect on me. But it's also now I can share the story and maybe it has an effect on other people, because if we think about it, every single act of defiance, of compliance, of consent, they create the society that we live in. And what I really hope to do with the research that I have is, if we can train people for defiance when it's necessary as well as compliance, that one day in that alleyway, one of the teenage boys would speak up and tell his peers to stop, so that my immigrant mother doesn't have to carry it alone. She can share that load. And that is what I hope for. And I think it is really possible if we really understand what defiance is and see it as something positive, necessary, pro-social even.
Thank you for sharing that powerful story. When when you repeated your mom's "What do you mean?" line, I felt goosebumps. Have you shared with your mom how powerful this experience was for you, and what's her reaction to it now? She probably doesn't view herself as a defiant person, so I'm curious how this story resonates with her.
It's really interesting because a lot of people view my mum as somebody who's very subservient, almost like as if it's some weakness. I actually view her as really strong, everything that she's had to cope with. And she often doesn't display defiance in that way, right? She has other values but in that particular situation, she really wanted to demonstrate like respect, dignity, equality, those values to me. And it's these moments, these defiant moments often can be quite large to people that are observing, but maybe not so large to the people that are doing it because they've been thinking about it for a long time or they've practiced it and they know how to do it. So I'm not sure she even remembers that moment, but talking to my brothers and things, they were like, of course, mum might do that. But, there's some surprise that I would view her as somebody defiant, and I really do. I think that's a very defiant moment. And again, it comes back to it's not our personality. That's just a myth that somebody is compliant or defiant. We can choose to be, it's a
Yeah, that
skill
was a
set.
moment for her.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. As you were sharing the takeaways from that experience, you talked about redefining defiance as not a negative, but as a positive, as a pro-social. I think many people, when they hear the word defiant, they think defiant personality disorder. They think about kids who are defiant or stubbornness. In your book, you redefine defiance. So maybe share that with us.
Sure. So the Oxford English Dictionary defines defiance as challenging the power of somebody else, like boldly and openly. And I grew up in England, so I'm not one to disagree normally with the Oxford English Dictionary, but in this instance, I think that definition is too narrow and it doesn't really honor our agency. And so my definition of defiance is simply to act in accordance with your values, especially when there is pressure to do otherwise. And so we reframe this from something negative to something positive and useful and necessary for us to do when we see something going against our values. But you're right in that people have this idea, and there's these medical terms, defiant oppositional disorder and other things. And yes, there are times when our children do the opposite of what we want them to do. And it can be oppositional. We can definitely describe it as oppositional. But if we think about, is that defiant or not with my definition? So, for example, with my teenage son, if I ask him to do something, at one point he went through this phase of doing the exact opposite. What does that mean? Right? It actually means he's listening very intently to what I want and my expectations. So if I define compliance as going along with the expectations of others, following an order or a suggestion, something that's external, his defiance isn't coming from his values or what's inside him. It's coming directly from something external. It's coming from me. Okay, he's doing the exact opposite. So I call this false defiance. It's not defiance in the way that we are behaving in alignment with our values, and we need to say no to something in order to do that. So it's really important to understand the differences between compliance and consent and defiance, because that misunderstanding of what it means to defy is often what holds us back. This moral equation that we have of compliance being good and defiance being bad can be broken, but only if we really understand what these terms mean.
Yeah. You mentioned compliance, the difference between compliance and consent. In your book, you talk about a lot of different research and examples of compliance. There's the famous Stanford prison experiment that I imagine many of our listeners have heard of before. Are there other examples of compliance that you think really demonstrate why people comply, and what is the root cause of compliance?
So there's a lot. There's a lot of experiments. So there's also the Stanley Milgram's obedience to authority experiments that really show that If you ask people to give harmful electric shocks to someone else, quite a large percentage of people will do so. I think 2/3 of people in this particular experiment did so. But what's really fascinating about that particular experiment is who are the people that could defy and how could they defy? So if we think about defiance, what I found is that people actively resist defying because of three key reasons. So first of all, we feel this enormous pressure to go along with someone else, and that's a large component of it. And what I've found in my own research is that there's some powerful psychological forces that come into play that keep us compliant. And one of those is what I call insinuation anxiety. So this is a distinct type of anxiety that we have, which is due to our concern or our fear of implying something negative to someone else. So it's almost the reverse of like social anxiety or performance anxiety when we're worried about how is somebody going to evaluate us. Insinuation anxiety is really about not wanting to give a negative evaluation to someone else. So if somebody asks you to, like your doctor asks you to do something or your boss asks you to do something, if you don't want to do this, if you want to say no or you don't think it's the right thing to do, it's often really hard because it implies the other person is wrong or they cannot be trusted. And this is very difficult for us to do, right? We don't want to insinuate that somebody's maybe corrupt, wrong, incompetent, biased, racist, sexist. It becomes very difficult for us to do that. And so we experience insinuation anxiety, this aversive emotional state, and it keeps us compliant and silent. It keeps us going along with something. And so that, my sort of studies that I've done really revealing that, I think are very powerful because it shows insinuation anxiety, not just in sort of small stakes situations. You can imagine you go to the hairdresser and they're saying, trust you with this new haircut. And you're looking up and thinking, stop, stop, stop. But it's very difficult if you're like me to say, actually say stop and say, this is really bad what you're doing. So we feel it in those small situations, but also in larger situations, so anxiety could explain why one study found that 9 out of 10 healthcare workers, most of them nurses, did not speak up when they saw a colleague or a physician making an error. It could be why co-pilots don't say anything to the pilots when they see a mistake, right? So these are situations you want people to be speaking up, life and death situations, but we often remain silent. So it's a powerful force. Then the second reason people don't speak up or they don't defy is because they don't understand what compliance is, what consent is, and what defiance is. And then the third reason, which is also equally important, is that once we decide to defy, we don't know how. We don't have the skill set. So we haven't been taught it. We don't know how to go about it or what to do.
Thank you for laying out those three reasons. There's a lot of research on compliance, evidently. So thank you for walking through some of that and explaining the foundations behind it. You mentioned earlier that defiance is a skill set. It's a practice. It's not a personality. It's not that you're a defiant person or not, at that individual moments you decide to defy. So what are the practices that we all can incorporate that will encourage us to defy more regularly? And is there any research about what's most effective, which practices are most evidence-based, kind of the inverse of the compliance research?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, I've looked at situations where people were able to defy. And those situations where they can do that require a couple of things. One is that they're very clear about what their values are. Like they know what their values are. And just even knowing what your values are is extremely helpful, because if you can write down and explain your values, whatever they may be, integrity, fairness, compassion, whatever that your values may be, if you can explain why your values are important to you, then the research shows that your behaviors are more likely to act in alignment with them. You're going to have less regret. We almost always say, oh, I wouldn't have acted that way. I would have said no. I would have questioned it. But then when we're actually in that situation, we don't know what to do. So first of all, knowing your values and clarifying your values actually also leads to a lower biological stress response. We have less cortisol. So it's a very useful thing to just know who we are and what we stand for. And then the people that can defy are the ones that can connect to their values and their responsibility and they have the ability to do it. So they thoroughly understand the situation, the risks and the benefits and the alternatives, and they have connected with their responsibility. So, for example, I could defy far more easily for my son than if I see him in danger, or I want to get a second medical opinion, or I think there's some school policy that isn't like serving the children in the best way. I can defy so much more easily for him than I can for myself. So we need to connect with like what I call the superpower of responsibility. Who are we responsible for, and how can we connect with those values? And then learning the skill set, which I can talk a little bit more about in terms of how we might be able to practice this. But I do have a defiance compass where we ask ourselves these questions. Who am I? And then we look outward at the situation. Is it going to be safe? Is it going to be effective? And then what does a person like me do in a situation like this? Which is really connecting with our responsibilities and then using our ability, our skill set that we have practiced long before the moment of crisis so we can defy in that situation.
I think the insight that it's a lot easier to defy for someone else often than it is for ourselves is really interesting. I definitely feel that personally as well. And so I think that is a good window into how defiance works. Your book came out 6 months or so ago. I'm sure you have received a ton of feedback, both mostly positive and some constructive. What lovable constructive criticism have you received that you wish, darn, I wish that I could incorporate this and re-release the book?
What criticism have I received? It's, there's been a lot of positive feedback, which has been great in terms of people feeling seen. Of course, you can't put every situation in the book or every person's scenario into the book, but there's enough stories in there that people could resonate with it. Of course, I wish it could be twice as long, so there would be more in there. I think, so a lot of the examples are from the US and the UK. So I did have more examples from other countries, but we did not have enough space for everything. So I wish I could have put down more examples from other places that have a different relationship with compliance and defiance, because a lot of, from the UK and the US, we do very much view ourselves as independent thinkers, free thinkers. We have a lot of agency and we value agency a lot. And yet we give it away so much. My research shows like really high levels of compliance with really obviously bad advice that people don't want to go along with. Yet I see what we call ceiling effects. So compliance rates of 85%. People are going along with something that they don't want to be going along with. And yet when people ask me, why don't you conduct this in other countries? Well, we're already at a very, very high level. We're at this ceiling effect in a country that really values agency. But I have had many conversations and I've done presentations in other cultures where, that relationship with compliance, with respect, that aspect of insinuation anxiety is far stronger than it is in certain people here. I mean, indeed, even here, I see very high levels of insinuation anxiety in certain contexts and certain people. But that is something that is important to me as well, to be able to translate this to other cultures and other countries.
I think it's fascinating to think about what defiance means in different contexts and different cultures. I think, there's a gender component to defiance likely. We had Kim Scott on the podcast last week, and she talked about her book, Radical Candor, and how many people misinterpret radical candor to be licensed to be a jerk. I'm curious, for your book, what are the misunderstandings or misinterpretations that people have? And building on what you shared before, are there cultural misunderstandings of this book that in different areas, markets, environments, it doesn't land in quite the same way as you intended?
So I think some people have said to me that, at first they were hesitant to pick up Defy because they have that strong association of defiance with something negative. And once they realized what it was, then they, thought, this is great, right? This is something that they really needed. They're a people pleaser. But they had that almost visceral reaction to the word defy, which is really interesting. It's really interesting to hear. I was just having a discussion with one of the foreign publishers that was translating the book into Spanish as to whether the title should be Defy or not, and some of the sort of translation aspects of that, and they decided to go with Dare to Defy, which actually was my original title before we put it down to Defy. So I was quite happy with that, but there was some back and forth as to what people will interpret from the word defy. And again, as I've said, like, you know, these myths of defiance having to be, even the, like, not having to be a particular person or having a particular personality trait, but even the way that we defy. It doesn't have to be loud or aggressive or violent or angry or bold. All of those things that we believe defiance to be, it's simply acting in alignment with your values when there's pressure to do otherwise. And you can do it in your own way with far less angst than you used to have. So I talk about quiet defiance in the book, and there's many different ways to defy that are more natural to us. And it's leaning into those aspects.
Yeah, and how do you, so speaking of quiet defiance, how do you defy at times where it's not comfortable or it's not safe? I mean, you in the book talk about Rosa Parks. That's a grand moment of defiance. It changed the course of history. Not everybody would have the courage to do so. It might not be safe to do so. So what is your suggestion to people who are challenged in moments where defiance might not be safe?
So this is a very important question, and it is part of the defiance compass when we look outside. You know, what kind of situation is this? Is it safe and is it effective? And what I've found in my research is that these are the two main questions that people ask to speak up. Even in organizations, looking at nurses and nurse managers, people will say, oh, you know, they were afraid to speak up because they didn't know what the consequences would be. Would they lose their job, or would they, you know, lose an important relationship to them at work? And the second reason is people will say that it's not because I'm afraid, but I've spoken up before and nothing happens, nothing changes. It's not effective. So what is the point of speaking up? So these are the two main questions that we ask. Is it safe, and will it have positive impact, or will it be effective? And that is really a very personal question for people, because as you mentioned, Rosa Parks, she spoke up. She gave her famous no on the bus in Alabama, and she wasn't safe. You know, in fact, she received many death threats for this, but she so strongly connected with her values for equality and people being treated the same that it was important for her to do so. And it was actually effective in that moment, in that it did bring about a large movement. But some people will, their own defiance calculus, so to speak, will be that this is the right time for me. And the questions we really should ask is it safe enough? Will it be effective enough? Because defiance is inherently risky. It's always going to have some risk to it, but then it's always going to have some costs to it. But then so does compliance. We often don't think about the costs of compliance, but they can take its toll. Like compliance, if you're continually complying and bowing your head to other people and giving away your soul in a way, like that your values are who you are, is the thing that matters the most, then it has significant costs psychologically and emotionally and even physically, you know, so burnout, stress, anxiety, depression, chronic inflammation. The costs are real. And so we need to think about that, especially when our compliance leads to immediate harm to ourselves or to other people, which can also happen.
Yeah, I love that addition of, is it safe enough? Is it effective enough? That, you know, don't wait for the perfect environment. And then also the opportunity cost of not defying is you're going to stay in compliance for longer. And that comes with its own series of risks and challenges and frustrations and downsides and whatnot. So that's great. You know, at Franklin Covey, we work with thousands of organizations around the world to help them improve their people and organizational performance. I was speaking with a client recently, kind of a CEO of a mid-sized company, and I was telling her that I was reading your book in preparation for this interview, and she laughed and said, I want fewer rebels, I need more followers. She doesn't want defiance in her organization. She wants people who fall in line and can execute on a preset strategy. So if you had 30 seconds in her boardroom and you had to kind of convince her, actually, no, defiance is a powerful force in organizations to improve organizational performance, what would you say?
I would say you really haven't thought about what defiance means, because you want to be told if you're going to walk off a cliff. You want people to be creative and innovative, and they cannot do that if they feel they're in a culture where they can't speak up, where they are expected to comply all the time, and there's many consequences for compliance. If you create that type of culture where it's not safe to speak up, it's not effective to speak up, that status quo will mean that your organization won't move in the right direction. And in fact, you'll have more turnover, more burnout, more dissatisfaction.
Great. Well, I'll give you and that answer is great. I'll give you an audience with her directly, so you can convince her. That's perfect. So I'd love to move now to a lightning round. I have a few questions to ask, of kind of short questions for you. The first one is, obviously you're from the UK originally, now living in the United States. What do you miss most about England?
I really miss sort of tea made really well. So I love drinking Earl Grey tea. I know it's a cliche, but I love it. So really good tea. And there's a particular type of yogurt that is made in a way in the UK that I just love. And I can't get it here, but it's one of the first things I look for when I go back.
Okay, that was a very authentic answer to say tea out the gate. That you have proven your bona fides. The accent is not faked. So second question for you, imagine that you got a billboard outside of New York City, let's say, that hundreds of thousands of people drive past every year. What tagline would you put on that billboard for everyone to see? And maybe it's just you would put Defy in like the hugest font, but maybe it's more sophisticated than that.
Yeah, that sounds brilliant, like Defy. In fact, I would probably go for two then. Defiance is a practice, not a personality, is one that definitely I would love to have on a billboard. But the other one that might make people think a little bit more is that the most painful moments in life aren't when others betray us, but when we betray ourselves. So I think that one might make people think a little bit more. And it really is about, staying true to our values.
Oh, that's great. Hopefully they're stuck in traffic so they can read it, the full sentence, but I think it's a powerful one. So next question, what is a leadership book that you find yourself recommending most regularly? And I'm going to ask you to not choose your own book here.
Yes, I won't choose my book or the books that you represent, although they are both great, of course. I really like Dare to Lead by Brené Brown. I think that's a great leadership book, and one that is quite complementary to some of the work that I do, but it's really about being vulnerable and displaying courage. So definitely recommend that one.
Perfect. Well, from Dare to Defy to Dare to Lead. Final question. What is a piece of leadership advice or leadership cliche that you wish you could ban from LinkedIn?
I think it would be that good leaders have to be positive all the time, because we often have that element. And certainly when I was in the UK, I ran into somebody from California, and they were asking me like, what's going on? The first 6 months that I moved to London, I thought everyone hated me at work because there was less positivity at work. Like, everything isn't great, everything isn't awesome. And I think having leaders that acknowledge like there's hard times, and this is how we're going to move ahead in these particular difficult circumstances, rather than having a positive spin all the time, I think it would be really helpful for people.
I love that. I think that's a great one. I found that transparency at work is so important, of kind of treating everyone as adults and sharing with them all of the good, the bad, and the ugly, and being in it together. So that's a great closer. So our final question for you is, who is a leader that has greatly influenced you in your journey, and what lesson or lessons can we take from them?
So when I think about this question, I really think about many different people that I've met, rather than having one guru that sits up on a pedestal that has really impacted me. And if pushed, I can tell you about my mentor, which, she did have a profound effect on me. But I think of certain things that I've learned that really made a difference. There was one workshop I went to at a conference where I heard something about this particular phrase that it's not you, it's the system. And you know what? That made such a difference to me, because often we go into an organization, and maybe women more than men, but we contort ourselves to fit a certain stereotype of how we think we should show up or who we should be or how compliant we are. And then we kept thinking like, well, am I doing this the right way? What am I doing wrong? And then if you think about it, if you just think it's not you, it's the system, that you don't actually have to change who you are, but sometimes the system isn't built for you, I think was really powerful for me. There is a mentor as well that really had a profound effect on me, where she really just helped me think about my career in a different way. And that's Carrie Ann Rockemere, who's been really valuable in my life.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for sharing about defiance, about your own experiences along the way and the lessons learned and the research led. I hope that everybody listening to today's episode finds a practice to bring into their life to help them defy in ways big and small. So Dr. Sunita Sah, thank you so much for joining us at Frank & Covey on Leadership, and we hope to have everyone join again next week. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.